The rain fell in sheets across Willow Creek Cemetery, turning the freshly dug grave into a dark wound in the earth. Elena Morrison stood beneath a black umbrella that did little to keep the November wind from cutting through her thin coat. Her free hand pressed protectively against her belly where her daughter kicked and shifted at 33 weeks. Beside the grave, her grandmother's casket gleamed mahogany and brass, soon to be lowered into the ground beside the grandfather Elena had never known. Victoria Morrison had been 92 when her heart finally gave out, sharp-minded and commanding until the very end. She'd raised Elena after the car accident that killed both her parents when Elena was 8, had taught her about art and business and the importance of knowing your own worth. Now she was gone, and Elena had never felt more alone. The priest's words about ashes and dust barely registered over the sound of rain hammering against umbrellas and the soft crying of the dozen mourners who'd braved the weather. Elena's hand trembled as she clutched a single white rose, waiting for the moment when she could say her final goodbye. "Elena." The voice came from behind her, masculine and cold. She turned slowly, her wet shoes squelching in the mud, and found herself face to face with Marcus Chen. He looked exactly as he had 9 months ago at that conference in Seattle, sharp-featured and handsome in an expensive suit, his dark hair perfectly styled despite the rain. But his eyes, those deep brown eyes that had looked at her with such intensity that one night they'd shared, now held nothing but ice. "Marcus?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "I didn't know you were coming. I wasn't planning to." He stepped closer, and Elena noticed the woman behind him. Isabelle Laurent, sleek and elegant in designer black, her blonde hair pulled into a perfect chignon that somehow hadn't been touched by the rain. "But there's something we need to discuss. Now." The priest faltered in his prayer, glancing uncertainly at the interruption. The other mourners, her grandmother's attorney, a few elderly friends from the Historical Society, her grandmother's nurse, shifted uncomfortably. "Can this wait?" Elena asked, feeling her daughter kick hard against her ribs as if sensing her mother's rising panic. "My grandmother's funeral." "No, it can't wait." Marcus pulled an envelope from his jacket, its edges already dampening in the rain. "I've been trying to reach you for 3 days, but you've been ignoring my calls." Because she'd been sitting vigil at her grandmother's bedside, watching the woman who raised her slip away breath by breath. Because she'd been planning this funeral and trying to figure out how she'd survive without the only family she had left. Because she was 8 months pregnant with his child and terrified to tell him. "I've been busy," she said quietly. "Right. Too busy to return calls, but not too busy to..." He stopped, himself, jaw clenching. "We need to talk about us. About this." He gestured vaguely at the space between them, and Elena understood with horrible clarity that he meant the relationship she'd been hoping they might build. "There is no us," Isabel said, stepping forward to link her arm through Marcus's with possessive intimacy. "That's what Marcus is trying to tell you. Whatever you thought happened between you two at that conference, it's over. It was always going to be over." Elena felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The conference had been 9 months ago, a charity gala for art preservation where she'd been presenting on restoration techniques. Marcus had been there as a donor, and they'd talked for hours about architecture and history and dreams. She'd thought, foolishly, she now realized, that their connection had been real. One night, one perfect night where she'd let herself believe that someone might love plain Elena Morrison, conservator and nobody, instead of looking at her like a business transaction. She'd found out she was pregnant 6 weeks later, had been trying to gather the courage to tell him ever since. "I understand," Elena said, though she didn't. "Can we please discuss this after..." "After what?" After you try to trap me with some sob story? Isabel's voice carried across the cemetery, sharp enough to make the elderly mourners gasp. Marcus told me all about you. How you threw yourself at him at that conference, how you've been calling and texting for months. How you won't take no for an answer. The lies landed like physical blows. Elena had called Marcus 3 times in 9 months. Had sent perhaps 5 texts, all carefully casual inquiries about whether they might get coffee sometime. That's not true, she said. But her voice was lost in the wind. Sign these. Marcus thrust the envelope toward her, and Elena took it automatically, her cold fingers fumbling with the wet paper. Inside were legal documents, dense with text she couldn't process through the shock. What are these? A cease and desist order. You're to have no further contact with me, my business, or anyone associated with me. His tone was clinical, businesslike. My attorney drafted them this morning. If you attempt to reach out again, we'll pursue legal action for harassment. Elena stared at the papers, water blurring the ink, and felt something crack open in her chest. Behind her, the priest had stopped praying entirely. Her grandmother's casket sat waiting, and here she stood being served with legal papers at the graveside. Marcus, please. She hated the pleading in her voice, but couldn't stop it. Can we just talk privately for a moment? There's something I need to tell you. There's nothing you need to tell him. A new voice joined the conversation, imperious and cold. Patricia Chen, Marcus's mother, emerged from beneath a designer umbrella held by a driver who appeared from nowhere. At 65, she radiated wealth and authority in her black suit that probably cost more than Elena's monthly rent. Elena had never met her, but she recognized her from Marcus's description that night in Seattle. The formidable woman who'd built a real estate empire alongside her late husband, who held Marcus to impossible standards, who approved of exactly nothing that didn't advance the family business. Mrs. Chen, Elena began. Don't. Patricia held up a perfectly manicured hand. I know exactly what you're trying to do, Ms. Morrison. Or, should I say, what you've been trying to do for the past 9 months. You saw my son at a conference, learned about his wealth and connections, and decided to manufacture a relationship that never existed. That's not. Isabel has told me everything. How you cornered Marcus at the bar, how you manipulated your way into his hotel room, how you've been stalking him ever since. Patricia's voice carried absolute certainty, the tone of someone used to being believed without question. Young women like you are all the same. You see a successful man and immediately start calculating how to get your hands on his money. Elena felt tears mixing with rain on her face. Her grandmother's casket was 3 feet away, waiting to be lowered into the ground. And these people were destroying her in front of the last witnesses to Victoria Morrison's life. I never wanted his money, she whispered. No? Then why did you track down his office address? Why did you learn his schedule? Why did you show up at 3 different properties he was developing? Patricia produced her own envelope, this one crisp and dry. I've had an investigator documenting your behavior. It's all here. Every unwanted appearance, every desperate attempt to force my son into acknowledging a connection that doesn't exist. The accusations were absurd. Elena had never been to any of Marcus's properties, had never contacted his office. But looking at the certainty in Patricia's face, at the cold agreement in Marcus's eyes, at Isabel's satisfied smile, Elena understood that truth didn't matter here. They'd constructed a narrative, and she was powerless to fight it. I need you to leave now, Marcus said, his voice devoid of any warmth she remembered from that night. My mother and Isabel are right. Whatever I thought I felt that night was a mistake. You're not the kind of woman I need in my life." "What kind of woman is that?" Elena asked, hating herself for asking but unable to stop. "The kind who builds things instead of taking them. The kind who brings something to the table beyond neediness and desperation." He glanced at her swollen belly, visible even beneath her coat, and something flickered in his expression too quickly for her to identify. "I'm sorry if you misunderstood the situation, but I was clear that night. It was just one night. Nothing more. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you." Elena felt her daughter kick again, harder this time, as if protesting her father's words. She wanted to scream that she was carrying his child, that their one night had created a life, that he had responsibilities beyond his own convenience. But looking at the four people arrayed against her, Marcus, Isabel, Patricia, and the driver who served as silent witness to her humiliation, Elena knew with perfect clarity that telling them about the baby right now would be the worst decision she could make. They'd call her a liar. They'd demand paternity tests. They'd accuse her of trying to trap Marcus, just as Isabel had said. And she'd have no proof beyond her own word and a due date that could, technically, allow for some other man to be the father. She thought of her grandmother, lying in that casket, and what Victoria would tell her to do. The Morrison women don't break in public, Elena. We wait. We plan. We strike when we're ready, not when we're cornered. "I understand," Elena said quietly, folding the wet legal documents and tucking them into her coat pocket. "I'll sign these and stay away from you. All of you." The relief on Marcus's face was visible, insulting in its obviousness. "Thank you. I think that's best for everyone." "Can I bury my grandmother now?" The question came out sharp, carrying an edge Elena didn't know she possessed. "Or would you like to serve me with additional papers first?" Patricia's mouth tightened with displeasure, but she nodded curtly. "We're done here. Marcus, Isabel, we have that property showing it too." They left without another word, their expensive umbrellas cutting through the rain like weapons. Elena watched them climb into a black Mercedes, watched it pull away from the cemetery, and felt something cold and hard settle in her chest, where her heart used to be. The priest cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Shall we continue?" "Yes," Elena said. "Please." She didn't hear the rest of the service, didn't register the words about eternal rest or the Lord's mercy. She stood at her grandmother's graveside, one hand on her belly and the other clutching her white rose, and made silent promises. "I'll protect her, grandmother. I'll make sure she never needs anyone who doesn't want her. I'll be strong enough for both of us." When the service ended and the other mourners filed away with sympathetic looks and useless condolences, Elena remained behind. The cemetery workers had begun lowering the casket, and she watched it descend into the earth with mechanical efficiency. "Ms. Morrison?" She turned to find an elderly man in a gray suit, holding a briefcase and wearing an expression of deep concern. He looked vaguely familiar, though she couldn't place him. "I'm sorry to intrude during such a difficult time," he said gently. "I'm Robert Callahan, your grandmother's attorney. We spoke on the phone about the funeral arrangements." "Mr. Callahan, yes, thank you for coming, of course." He glanced toward the grave, where workers were shoveling dirt with rhythmic thuds. "Victoria was an extraordinary woman. I had the privilege of serving as her counsel for 40 years. Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. If she started crying now, she might never stop. "I know this is poor timing," Robert continued, "but there are some urgent matters regarding your grandmother's estate that we need to discuss." Time-sensitive documents that require your immediate attention. Estate. The word barely registered. Her grandmother had lived simply in a modest townhouse in Georgetown, had spent her later years volunteering at museums and historical societies. There would be the townhouse to settle, perhaps some small savings, enough to cover funeral expenses with maybe a little left over. "Can it wait a few days?" Elena asked. I'm afraid it can't." Robert's expression was serious. "There are assets that need to be secured immediately, business operations that require authorization, accounts that must be accessed within the week or they'll be frozen pending probate." Business operations. What business operations? "Mr. Callahan, I think there might be some confusion. My grandmother was retired. She didn't have any business to manage." Something that looked almost like a smile crossed the attorney's weathered face. "Ms. Morrison, your grandmother spent the last 40 years of her life letting people believe exactly that. But the truth is considerably more complex." He pulled a thick envelope from his briefcase. "I think we should meet at my office tomorrow morning. 9 a.m., if possible. What I have to tell you will change your understanding of everything." Elena took the envelope with numb fingers, feeling the weight of whatever documents it contained. "What is this?" "A letter from your grandmother. She instructed me to give it to you immediately upon her death, before any other business was conducted." Robert's voice softened. "She anticipated that you might face difficulties after she passed. She wanted you to have certain information before anyone else knew you possessed it." The rain had slowed to a drizzle now, and somewhere overhead, the sun was trying to break through gray clouds. Elena looked down at the envelope, at her grandmother's familiar handwriting, spelling out her name. Elena Catherine Morrison. 9 a.m., she repeated. "I'll be there." After Robert left, Elena stood alone in the cemetery, the envelope pressed against her chest, her daughter moving restlessly inside her. Around her, Willow Creek stretched in all directions, rows of headstones marking lives completed, stories finished, love and loss immortalized in granite and marble. Her grandmother was in the ground now, the grave filled. Nothing left but a mound of dark earth and the flowers Elena had chosen. White roses, because Victoria had loved them. Elena placed her rose on the fresh grave and whispered words she knew no one but her daughter would ever hear. "I don't know what to do. He doesn't want us. His mother thinks I'm a gold digger. And I'm about to be homeless because I used my savings for your funeral." The wind picked up, rustling through the trees, and Elena could almost hear her grandmother's voice in it. "Read the letter, Elena. Then you'll know what to do." She walked back to her 15-year-old Honda Civic, the only mourner remaining in the cemetery, and sat in the driver's seat with the envelope in her lap. Her fingers shook as she broke the seal, and a single sheet of expensive stationery fell out, covered in her grandmother's elegant script. "My dearest Elena, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I pray you're somewhere safe and warm. But knowing life, knowing the world, knowing the particular cruelties it saves for women who dare to be vulnerable, I suspect you might be in the middle of a storm. So let me give you shelter, my darling girl. Let me give you armor." The key in this envelope opens box 247 at First National Bank. Inside, you'll find documents that will seem impossible, numbers that will make you dizzy, and a truth I've kept from everyone, including you. I am not, and never was, the retired school teacher everyone believed. That was a role I chose after your grandfather died. A disguise I wore to protect our family from the kinds of people who see dollar signs instead of human beings. Your grandfather, Thomas Morrison, founded Morrison Maritime in 1952 with a single cargo ship. By the time he died in 1985, we owned a fleet of 40 vessels and contracts with every major port on the eastern seaboard. I've spent the last 40 years expanding that empire while pretending to be a harmless old woman who volunteers at museums. Morrison Maritime is now worth $900 million, Elena. Ships, ports, logistics contracts, warehouses, real estate holdings across 6 states. It's all documented in the safety deposit box. It's all yours. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I tell you? Why keep this secret for 30 years while you struggled to pay for graduate school? While you lived in that tiny apartment, while you counted pennies to buy groceries? Because I needed you to know who you are without money defining you. I needed you to be strong, independent, capable of standing on your own before the world tried to knock you down. And because I needed to see who would love Elena Morrison, the person, not Elena Morrison, the heiress. Whoever hurt you, and I know someone did, I could see it in your eyes these last few months, did you a favor. They showed you their true nature. They gave you information you needed. Now you have everything you need to fight back. The company has been run by a board of trustees I selected personally. They're expecting you. Robert Callahan will facilitate the transition. And Elena, my darling girl, I need you to understand something crucial. This money isn't just money, it's power. It's the ability to protect yourself and your child. It's the freedom to never need anyone who doesn't deserve you. It's revenge, if you choose it. But more than that, it's possibility. Build something beautiful, Elena. Build something that makes the people who underestimated you wish they'd shown you the respect you deserved. I love you more than words can express. I always have. I always will. Show them what a Morrison woman can do. All my love. Grandmother Elena read the letter 3 times, sitting in her car in the rain, while her daughter kicked and shifted inside her. $900 million. A shipping empire. 40 years of secrets. Her hands shook as she pulled out the small key that had fallen from the envelope. It was brass and old, the kind that looked like it belonged to a Victorian novel rather than a modern bank. She looked at the clock on her dashboard. 3:47 p.m. The bank would still be open for another hour. Elena started her car, the engine coughing before catching, and pulled out of the cemetery. Behind her, her grandmother's grave sat fresh and raw against the manicured lawn. Ahead of her, Marcus Chen was probably showing Isabel his latest development, laughing about the desperate woman they'd put in her place at a funeral, congratulating himself on escaping whatever trap he thought Elena had been setting. He had no idea what he'd just done. He had no idea who he'd just dismissed. And he had absolutely no idea that the woman he'd humiliated at her grandmother's graveside was about to become one of the most powerful people in maritime commerce. Elena drove toward the bank, her grandmother's letter pressed against her thigh, her daughter moving inside her, and felt something shift in her chest. Not quite hope. It was too soon for that. But something harder and colder and infinitely more useful. Determination. Marcus Chen had served her with cease and desist papers at her grandmother's funeral. Called her desperate and needy, looked at her pregnant belly with disgust and dismissed her like trash. He was about to learn what happened when you underestimated a Morrison woman. And by the time Elena was finished, he was going to wish he'd been kinder to the art conservator he'd gotten pregnant and forgotten about. Continue Ev 3:47 p.m. The safety deposit room at First National Bank was exactly as Elena imagined a place for secrets would be. cold, silent, and lined with small metal doors that held the hidden truths of countless lives. Box 247 sat at eye level, and when she inserted the brass key, it turned with a soft click that seemed to echo in the quiet space. Inside, folders were stacked with military precision, each labeled in her grandmother's meticulous handwriting. Morrison Maritime, corporate structure, property holdings, investment portfolios, board of trustees, legal protections, emergency protocols. Elena pulled them out with trembling hands, spreading them across the small table in the viewing room. The first folder contained a letter of introduction to the board, signed by Victoria Morrison and dated 3 months ago, as if her grandmother had known her time was running short. To the Board of Trustees of Morrison Maritime Holdings. By the time you read this, I will have passed, and my granddaughter, Elena Catherine Morrison, will have presented herself to you as my designated heir and successor. Elena has been raised to understand art, history, beauty, and preservation. She has not been raised in the shipping business, and I expect some of you will question whether she possesses the skills to lead this company. Let me be clear. Elena possesses something far more valuable than industry experience. She possesses integrity, intelligence, and the kind of strategic mind that sees 3 moves ahead while everyone else is still celebrating their last victory. You will teach her the business. You will guide her decisions until she's ready to make them independently. And you will remember that Morrison Maritime exists because I built it, and I choose who inherits my life's work. Anyone who cannot accept Elena's leadership may resign immediately with a generous severance package. Anyone who attempts to undermine her authority will be removed with nothing. She is a Morrison. That means she's stronger than she looks, smarter than you expect, and infinitely more capable of ruthlessness than anyone wearing pearls and speaking softly has any right to be. Serve her well. Victoria Morrison. Elena read the letter twice, hearing her grandmother's voice in every word. Then she opened the corporate structure folder and felt her breath catch. Morrison Maritime Holdings wasn't just a shipping company. It was a constellation of businesses connected by her grandmother's strategic vision. The original fleet had grown to 87 cargo vessels operating on 6 continents. But Victoria had also acquired port facilities, warehousing operations, logistics software companies, and real estate holdings in every major coastal city from Boston to Miami. The numbers made Elena's head spin. Annual revenue, $3.2 billion. Net assets, $900 million. Employees, 12,000 worldwide. Board members whose names she recognized from Fortune 500 lists and political fundraisers. A noise behind her made Elena look up. A bank employee stood in the doorway, her expression apologetic. "I'm sorry to disturb you, Ms. Morrison, but there's a gentleman here who says he needs to speak with you urgently." "A Mr. Callahan?" Elena checked her phone. Somehow 2 hours had passed since she'd entered the safety deposit room. Outside the windows, darkness had fallen, and the rain had returned with renewed fury. "Please send him in." Robert Callahan appeared moments later, looking exactly as unruffled as he had at the funeral, despite the late hour and bad weather. He took in the folders spread across the table and nodded with satisfaction. "You found everything, then?" "I found documents that suggest my grandmother was running a billion-dollar shipping empire, while everyone thought she was a retired volunteer." Elena heard the edge in her own voice. "Why didn't she tell me? Why let me struggle through graduate school with student loans when she could have—" "Because she was testing you." Robert settled into the chair across from her, his briefcase clicking open with practiced ease. "And more importantly, she was protecting you." "From what?" "From people who would have seen you as a target instead of a person." He pulled out a thick file labeled Elena Morrison, Background Investigation. Victoria hired me to conduct a comprehensive investigation of everyone in your life, starting when you turned 25. She wanted to know who loved you for yourself and who might be positioning themselves for access to eventual wealth. Elena felt her stomach clench. You investigated my friends? My colleagues? Everyone. Your graduate school classmates, your professors, the men you dated, even the baristas at the coffee shop you frequented. Robert's expression was apologetic but firm. Your grandmother was thorough, Miss Morrison. She'd seen too many wealthy families destroyed by fortune hunters and con artists. She wanted to make sure you knew the difference between genuine connection and calculated manipulation. And what did you find? That you have remarkably good judgment in friends. Most of the people close to you had no idea about your family's wealth and showed no signs of being interested in anything beyond genuine friendship. He paused, opening the file to a section marked with a red tab. With one notable exception. Elena already knew what she'd find before Robert turned the folder around. Photographs of Marcus Chen smiled up at her from multiple pages. Marcus at charity galas, Marcus closing real estate deals, Marcus with his arm around various beautiful women at industry events. Marcus Chen, Robert said quietly. Age 34. Net worth approximately $25 million, though that's leveraged heavily against property holdings that could collapse if the real estate market shifts. He's ambitious, talented, and according to multiple sources, utterly ruthless in business dealings. When did you start investigating him? 9 months ago, after Victoria's assistant noticed you'd been researching his company online. Robert flipped through pages of surveillance photos and financial records. She was concerned when she saw you'd attended a charity gala in Seattle where Mr. Chen was speaking. Elena remembered that night with painful clarity. She'd gone for professional reasons. The gala was raising money for art preservation, directly related to her work. Meeting Marcus had been accidental. Their conversation had felt natural. Their connection had seemed real. The night you spent with him at the Fairmont Hotel, Robert continued, his tone carefully neutral. Victoria asked me to intensify the investigation. She wanted to know if Mr. Chen was aware of your identity, if he'd targeted you deliberately, or if the encounter was genuinely spontaneous. And? Elena's voice came out smaller than she intended. Our conclusion was that he had no idea who you were. Marcus Chen appears to have been genuinely attracted to Elena Morrison, art conservator, and had no knowledge that you were connected to Morrison Maritime. Robert's expression softened slightly. However, his mother Patricia is another story entirely. He produced another section of the file, this one focused on Patricia Chen. Elena saw photographs of an elegant woman in her 60s at various business functions, always perfectly dressed, always commanding attention. Patricia Chen built her real estate empire through strategic marriages and hostile takeovers. She's brilliant, ruthless, and utterly dedicated to advancing her son's position in society. Robert tapped a particular photograph showing Patricia at a charity board meeting. She's also obsessed with controlling every aspect of Marcus's life, including who he marries. Let me guess. Isabelle Laurent meets with her approval. Isabelle's family owns 3 art galleries in major cities, has connections to European aristocracy, and brings exactly the kind of social capital Patricia values. Robert closed the file. But here's what's interesting, Ms. Morrison. According to our investigation, Isabelle's galleries are failing. She's deeply in debt and desperately needs an injection of capital to avoid bankruptcy. Elena felt pieces clicking into place. So she targeted Marcus for his money. Precisely. And Patricia, despite her vaunted business acumen, appears to be completely unaware that the sophisticated French gallery owner is actually a desperate fortune hunter. Robert smiled grimly. Your grandmother found that particularly amusing. She left notes in the file suggesting that karma had a sense of humor. Elena looked down at her swollen belly, where her daughter was practicing what felt like kickboxing moves against her ribs. My grandmother knew I was pregnant. She suspected. She asked me to have you followed after you missed your period, and when our investigator confirmed you'd visited an OB/GYN, Victoria was overjoyed. Robert's voice caught slightly. She spent her last 3 months making arrangements to protect you and her great-granddaughter. The accelerated transfer of assets, the streamlined board structure, the legal protections, all of it was designed to ensure you'd have everything you needed when the baby came. Did she know about today? About Marcus and his mother showing up at the funeral? She anticipated something like it. Victoria believed that Patricia Chen was having you investigated, trying to determine if you posed any threat to her plans for Marcus and Isabel. Robert pulled out another document, this one a legal filing. This is a restraining order petition your grandmother drafted 2 weeks before she died. She never filed it because she wanted you to make that decision yourself. Elena scanned the document, seeing her grandmother's strategy laid out with devastating precision. Evidence of harassment, documentation of Patricia's investigation, proof that Marcus's cease and desist order was based on fabricated claims. She knew they'd try to push me out of Marcus's life. She knew that people who've never struggled for anything often react with extreme hostility when someone they've dismissed turns out to have power they didn't anticipate. Robert gathered his documents back into organized stacks. Your grandmother wanted you to have choices, Ms. Morrison. You can ignore Marcus Chen and his family entirely. They're frankly beneath your notice now. You can pursue legal action for the harassment you suffered today. Or? Robert's smile turned sharp. Or you can do what Victoria would have done. You can be patient. You can let them discover who you really are when the time is right. You can watch them realize the magnitude of their mistake and understand that the woman they treated like trash at a funeral is about to become someone they desperately wish they'd treated with respect. Elena looked around the safety deposit room, at the folders representing her grandmother's life work, at the empire built in secret while the world slept. At 40 years of strategic planning about to be placed in her inexperienced but determined hands. I want to meet the board, she said quietly. Tomorrow. All of them. They're expecting you at 9 a.m. at the Morrison Maritime headquarters in Baltimore. It's about an hour's drive from here. Robert stood, offering his hand. Welcome home, Miss Morrison. Your grandmother would be very proud. After the bank closed, Elena sat in her car in the parking lot and called the only person she trusted completely. Rebecca Hayes answered on the second ring, her voice bright with forced cheerfulness. Lainey, how are you holding up? I'm so sorry I couldn't make it to the funeral. That client emergency in Boston came out of nowhere. Becca, Elena's voice cracked on her best friend's name. I need you. I'm on my way. Where are you? 20 minutes later, Rebecca pulled her Audi into the parking space next to Elena's ancient Civic. She took one look at Elena's tear-stained face through the rain-streaked window and immediately opened the passenger door, sliding in despite the cramped space. Tell me everything. So Elena did. She told her about Marcus showing up at the funeral, about the cease and desist papers, about Isabel's cruelty and Patricia's accusations. She told her about the letter from her grandmother, about the safety deposit box, about the 900 million shipping empire that had been hiding in plain sight for 40 years. Rebecca listened in stunned silence, her dark eyes growing wider with each revelation. "Holy shit," she finally said. "Lainey, your grandmother was secretly running a shipping empire worth almost $1 billion? While volunteering at museums and attending historical society meetings? Apparently, yes. And Marcus Chen, the father of your baby, the man who just served you with harassment papers at your grandmother's funeral, has no idea who you really are? None whatsoever." Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then she started laughing, a sound caught between hysteria and pure joy. "Oh my God. Oh my God, Lainey. This is the greatest reversal I've ever heard in my life." "Is it?" Elena pressed her hands against her belly, feeling her daughter move. "Because right now, it just feels overwhelming and terrifying. I don't know anything about shipping. I don't know how to run a company. I'm about to have a baby whose father thinks I'm a desperate stalker. Okay, first of all, you have degrees in art history and business administration. You spent 3 years managing the conservation department at a major museum. You know how to lead people, manage budgets, and handle complex projects." Rebecca turned in her seat, fixing Elena with an intense stare. "Second, you have a board of experienced executives who are literally paid to teach you the industry. And third," she reached over and gripped Elena's hand tightly. "Third, you are about to show Marcus Chen and his horrible mother and that fake French bitch exactly what happens when someone underestimates a woman who's been raised by a secret billionaire matriarch. You're going to walk into that boardroom tomorrow and claim your inheritance. You're going to learn everything about shipping and logistics and international commerce. And then, when you're ready, you're going to make them understand that the pregnant woman they humiliated was actually the most powerful person in that cemetery." Elena felt something shift in her chest. Not quite confidence yet, but the beginning of it. "I don't want revenge." "Bullshit." Rebecca's voice was gentle but firm. "You want justice. There's a difference. Revenge is petty and destructive. Justice is making sure people face appropriate consequences for their cruelty. And Lainey, what they did to you today, at your grandmother's funeral, while you're 8 months pregnant, that deserves consequences. What if I can't do this? What if I fail? Then you fail. But I don't think you will." Rebecca squeezed her hand once more before releasing it. "Your grandmother spent 40 years building an empire while everyone thought she was just a nice old lady who liked museums. That kind of strategic brilliance doesn't come from nowhere, Lainey. It's genetic." Elena looked at her best friend. This woman who'd been by her side since college, who'd held her hair while she threw up from morning sickness, who'd helped her practice what to say when she finally told Marcus about the baby. "Will you come with me tomorrow? To the board meeting?" "Try to stop me," Rebecca grinned. "I want to see the faces of these shipping executives when they realize their new boss is a pregnant art historian who can probably tell them the complete provenance of every piece of art in their offices, but doesn't know port from starboard." Despite everything, Elena laughed. Then she cried. Then she laughed again, and Rebecca held her while the rain pounded against the car roof and the November darkness pressed close around them. When the storm finally passed, Elena drove to Rebecca's apartment in Georgetown and collapsed on her friend's couch while Rebecca ordered Thai food and Googled Morrison Maritime on her laptop. "Lainey, come look at this." Elena hauled herself off the couch. 8 months pregnant made every movement an expedition, and peered over Rebecca's shoulder at the laptop screen. Morrison Maritime's website was professional and understated, showcasing cargo vessels and port facilities with minimal fanfare. But the About Us section contained photographs that made Elena's breath catch. There was her grandfather, Thomas Morrison, standing beside a cargo ship in 1952, looking young and determined in rolled-up shirt sleeves. There was her grandmother decades later, at what appeared to be a ship christening ceremony, wearing pearls and a dignified smile while breaking a champagne bottle against a hull. And there, in the leadership section under Chairman Emeritus, was a photograph of Victoria Morrison that Elena had never seen before. Her grandmother stood on the deck of a massive container ship, her silver hair whipping in the wind, wearing a business suit and an expression of absolute command. "She looks like a queen," Rebecca whispered. "She looks like herself," Elena replied. "The version of herself she never let me see." Rebecca scrolled down to the board of directors, and Elena recognized several names from the files. Margaret Zhao, Chief Financial Officer. David Harrison, Director of Operations. Catherine Martinez, General Counsel. Robert Callahan, of course, listed as Senior Legal Advisor. These people have been running a billion-dollar company while taking orders from a woman everyone thought was retired, Rebecca said. That's loyalty, Laney. That's the kind of dedication that doesn't come from just paying people well. Your grandmother must have been extraordinary to inspire that. Elena thought about the woman who'd raised her after her parents died, who'd taught her to appreciate beauty and history, who'd taken her to museums every Sunday and art galleries every month, who'd sat with her during thunderstorms and made her soup when she was sick and never once mentioned that she was directing international shipping operations between PTA meetings and volunteer shifts. "She was protecting me," Elena said quietly. "From all of this. From people who would have wanted me for the wrong reasons. From the pressure of expectations I wasn't ready to handle. She let me be normal until I was strong enough to be extraordinary. And now? Now I have a meeting at 9 a.m. with a board of directors who are about to meet their new chairman." Elena pulled out her phone and opened her email, seeing dozens of unread messages that had accumulated while she was at the bank. "And I need to figure out what to wear that says, 'I'm capable of running your company,' while also accommodating the fact that I'm 33 weeks pregnant and most of my professional wardrobe no longer fits." Rebecca was already pulling up shopping sites on her laptop. "We're going shopping first thing tomorrow. You're walking into that boardroom looking like the heir to a shipping empire, not like someone who got served with legal papers at her grandmother's funeral." "I can't afford—" "Laney," Rebecca turned to face her fully. "You're worth $900 million. I think you can afford a decent suit." The number still didn't feel real. Elena Morrison, who'd been eating ramen 3 nights a week to save money, who'd been worried about affording baby supplies, who'd been sleeping on a futon in a studio apartment because it was all she could manage on a conservator's salary. That Elena Morrison was gone, buried alongside her grandmother in Willow Creek Cemetery. The woman who would wake up tomorrow morning was someone new, someone powerful, someone who wouldn't be dismissed or humiliated or told she wasn't enough. Someone Marcus Chen was going to regret underestimating. Elena pulled out her phone and looked at the cease and desist letter she'd photographed before the rain completely destroyed the paper copy. The legal language was dense and threatening, full of warnings about harassment and stalking and legal consequences if she ever attempted to contact Marcus again. She thought about that night in Seattle, about the way Marcus had looked at her like she was the most interesting person in the room, about the conversations that had stretched until dawn, about the connection that had felt so genuine she'd let herself believe in fairy tales one more time. Then she thought about his face today at the funeral, cold and certain, looking at her like she was something dirty he'd stepped in. "What are you thinking?" Rebecca asked softly. I'm thinking that my grandmother was right. People reveal who they really are when they think you have nothing to offer them. Elena deleted the photo of the cease and desist letter, erasing it from her phone with a decisive tap. Marcus showed me exactly who he is. Cold, easily influenced by his mother, willing to believe lies about someone he spent an entire night talking to. So, what are you going to do? Elena looked at her best friend, at the laptop showing her family's company, at her swollen belly where her daughter was sleeping peacefully, unaware that her world was about to transform. I'm going to do exactly what my grandmother did. I'm going to build something extraordinary while everyone underestimates me. She smiled, and it felt sharp and powerful and completely unlike anything she'd ever felt before. And when Marcus Chen finally discovers who I really am, when he understands that the woman he called desperate and needy is actually someone who could buy his entire real estate portfolio without affecting her daily cash flow, I want him to remember every single word he said to me today. "That's my girl," Rebecca said with satisfaction. "Now let's order dessert and look at maternity power suits, because tomorrow you're going to walk into that boardroom and start your transformation from art conservator to shipping magnate." "I'm terrified," Elena admitted. "Good. Fear means you're taking it seriously." Rebecca pulled up a high-end maternity boutique's website. "Your grandmother built an empire while pretending to be ordinary. You're going to run that empire while showing everyone exactly how extraordinary you are. And Lainey? Yeah? I can't wait to see the look on Marcus Chen's face when he realizes the biggest mistake of his life was humiliating you at a funeral, instead of asking you why you really wanted to talk to him." Elena touched her belly, feeling her daughter kick in response. "He's going to find out about the baby eventually." "Yes, he is. But by then, you'll be in a position of such complete power that he'll understand he has no leverage whatsoever. He'll understand that every decision about your daughter's life will be made by you, on your terms, when you're ready." Rebecca's voice was fierce. "He gave up his right to be involved when he served you with legal papers instead of having an actual conversation. Now he gets to face the consequences." That night, Elena slept in Rebecca's guest room and dreamed of ships crossing vast oceans, of her grandmother standing at the helm of a cargo vessel, of her daughter growing up knowing her mother was powerful enough to move goods across continents and brave enough to face down anyone who tried to diminish her. When she woke at 6 a.m., her phone showed 7 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize. She let them go to voicemail, remembering the cease and desist letter, wondering if Marcus's attorney was already trying to enforce the no-contact order. But when she listened to the messages, they weren't from a lawyer. "Ms. Morrison, this is Margaret Zhao from Morrison Maritime. Mr. Callahan informed us of the meeting this morning. The board and I wanted to extend our condolences and let you know that we're looking forward to meeting Victoria's granddaughter. Your grandmother spoke of you often and with such pride. We'll see you at 9. 7 messages, all from different board members, all expressing sympathy for her loss and anticipation for the meeting. All of them treating her like she already belonged, like she'd already earned her place at the table simply by being Victoria Morrison's granddaughter. Elena stood in Rebecca's guest room, holding her phone, and felt the last piece of her old life fall away. She wasn't the woman Marcus had dismissed at the funeral. She was a Morrison. And it was time for everyone, especially Marcus Chen, to learn what that meant. Morrison Maritime. Headquarters occupied 15 floors of a glass and steel tower in Baltimore's Inner Harbor, with views stretching across the water to where cargo ships moved like patient giants through the shipping channels. Elena stood in the parking garage at 8:45, staring up at the building and trying to control her breathing. Rebecca emerged from the driver's seat and came around to open Elena's door. "You look perfect." The navy maternity suit they'd found that morning at an emergency shopping trip fit like it had been tailored for her. Professional, expensive, and somehow making her pregnancy look powerful instead of vulnerable. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon, and the pearl earrings that had been her grandmother's caught the morning light. "I look like I'm playing dress-up," Elena said. "You look like a woman who's about to take control of a $900 million empire." Rebecca offered her hand to help Elena out of the car. "Now let's go show these shipping executives what Victoria Morrison's granddaughter is made of." The lobby was all marble and dark wood, with a massive photograph of a Morrison maritime cargo ship dominating one wall. A receptionist looked up from her desk, her professional smile widening with genuine warmth when she saw Elena. "Ms. Morrison? We've been expecting you. I'm Sarah Chen. No relation to any Chens you might know," she added, with a knowing look that suggested the entire company had already heard about the funeral incident. "The board is gathered in the executive conference room on the 15th floor. Mr. Callahan is waiting to escort you up." Robert Callahan appeared from the elevator bay, looking exactly as composed as always, despite the early hour. "Ms. Morrison, you look ready." "I look terrified," Elena admitted quietly as they stepped into the elevator. "Your grandmother looked terrified the first time she walked into a board meeting after your grandfather died," Robert replied. "She told me later that she spent the entire elevator ride trying not to throw up. But she walked in with her head high, listened to everyone's advice, asked intelligent questions, and made it clear that Morrison Maritime was her company now. That's all you need to do today." The elevator rose smoothly, each floor ticking past like a countdown. Elena caught sight of her reflection in the polished steel doors. A pregnant woman in an expensive suit, looking far more confident than she felt. What if they don't respect me? What if they think I'm too young, too inexperienced, too... "Pregnant?" Robert's voice was gentle. "Your grandmother was pregnant with your father during the Cuban Missile Crisis, while simultaneously negotiating shipping contracts with the Navy. She used to joke that she did her best negotiating while experiencing morning sickness because it made military admirals so uncomfortable they'd agree to anything just to end the meeting." Despite her nerves, Elena laughed. The elevator doors opened directly into an elegant reception area. Through glass walls, Elena could see a long conference table surrounded by 8 people who'd stood as soon as the elevator chimed. "They're standing for you," Rebecca whispered. "That's respect, Laney." Robert led them into the conference room, and Elena felt every eye in the room assess her with varying degrees of curiosity, sympathy, and calculation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Robert said formally, "may I present Elena Catherine Morrison, chairman and sole heir to the Morrison Maritime Holdings." Margaret Zhao stepped forward first, a woman in her mid-50s with sharp eyes and an expression of genuine warmth. "Ms. Morrison, I'm Margaret Zhao, CFO. Your grandmother and I worked together for 23 years. She spoke of you constantly and with such pride." One by one, the board members introduced themselves. David Harrison, Director of Operations, a man in his 60s with the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades at sea. Catherine Martinez, General Counsel, elegant and precise in her movements. James Mitchell, VP of Logistics. Sarah Park, Director of International Relations. Thomas Reeves, Chief Technology Officer. Patricia O'Connor, Human Resources Director. Each of them offered condolences that felt genuine rather than perfunctory. Each of them looked at Elena not with skepticism, but with something that looked almost like relief. When everyone had settled into their seats, Margaret Zhao opened a leather portfolio and fixed Elena with a direct stare. "Ms. Morrison, we've prepared a comprehensive briefing on the company's current status, pending contracts, and strategic initiatives. But before we begin, I think it's important you understand something. What's that? Your grandmother ran this company with an iron fist wrapped in velvet gloves. She was brilliant, ruthless when necessary, and utterly dedicated to protecting Morrison Maritime's legacy. Margaret's voice was steady, but filled with emotion. She was also preparing you to take over without you even knowing it. Elena felt her stomach clench. What do you mean? David Harrison leaned forward. Every time you visited your grandmother and mentioned a problem at the museum, budget issues, staff conflicts, supply chain problems, she'd discuss it with us afterward. She'd use your situations as teaching moments, explaining how she'd handle similar issues in shipping. You essentially got an MBA in leadership without realizing you were in class. The restoration project you led 3 years ago? Catherine Martinez added. The one where you had to coordinate 17 different contractors across 8 months while staying under budget? Your grandmother made us study your methodology. She told us you understood project management better than half our senior staff. Elena's mind reeled. She was testing me? She was teaching you, Margaret corrected gently. Everything she did was designed to prepare you for this moment without putting pressure on you before you were ready. She wanted you to develop confidence in your own abilities before the weight of family expectation came crashing down. Robert pulled out a file Elena hadn't seen before. 3 months ago, your grandmother asked me to document every major decision she made and the reasoning behind it. She created what amounts to a manual for running Morrison Maritime, specifically tailored to your strengths and areas where you'd need additional support. He slid the file across the table. Inside were hundreds of pages. Business philosophies, case studies, strategic frameworks, all in Victoria's precise handwriting, with notes like Elena already understands this from her museum work and will need mentoring here and has natural talent for this. Just needs confidence. She knew she was dying, Elena whispered. She knew she had limited time, Margaret confirmed. She spent every moment of it making sure you'd have everything you needed to succeed, including us. She gestured around the table. Every person in this room was selected not just for their expertise, but for their ability to teach, mentor, and support you as you learn this business. Patricia O'Connor spoke for the first time, her voice warm. Your grandmother made each of us promise that we'd treat you like family, not just an employer. She wanted you to have a team you could trust completely. Elena felt tears threatening and blinked them back fiercely. Why didn't she just tell me? Why keep it all secret until now? Because she wanted you to have a choice, Robert said quietly. If you'd known about Morrison Maritime while you were in graduate school, would you have studied art history? Would you have pursued conservation work? Or would you have felt obligated to study business and shipping? To prepare yourself for a role you might not have wanted? The truth of it hit Elena like a wave. She would have abandoned every dream, every passion, every choice that made her who she was, all to prepare for an inheritance she'd never asked for. She gave me freedom, Elena said slowly, and now she's giving me power. Exactly. Margaret opened another portfolio. So, here's what we propose, Ms. Morrison. We spend the next 6 months teaching you everything about this company. The industry, our operations, our people, our strategies. You shadow different departments, attend meetings, ask questions, make observations. We don't expect you to make major decisions yet. We just want you to learn. And after 6 months? After 6 months, you start leading. Not alone. We'll still be here to advise. But as the chairwoman your grandmother trained you to become. David Harrison's smile was encouraging. You'll make mistakes. Everyone does. but we'll make sure none of those mistakes are fatal to the company. That's what a good board does. Elena looked around the table at these 8 strangers who'd served her grandmother faithfully for decades, who'd kept her secrets and built her empire, and were now offering to do the same for a pregnant 29-year-old who knew more about Renaissance paintings than shipping manifests. "What about today?" she asked. "What do I need to know right now?" Margaret's expression turned serious. "Today, you need to know that Marcus Chen's real estate development company has been trying to acquire one of our port facilities in Charleston for the past 2 years. Your grandmother has been refusing to sell because the property is strategically valuable and because," she paused. "Well, because she'd been researching Mr. Chen's business practices and didn't trust him." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "Marcus wants to buy Morrison Maritime property?" "His company, Chen Development Group, made another offer last week. Very generous. $40 million for a property we acquired for $18 million 10 years ago." David pulled up a presentation on the conference room screen. "But your grandmother's notes indicate she believed Mr. Chen planned to flip the property immediately to a competitor for 3 times what he'd pay us. So he'd make $80 million in profit while we'd lose a strategic asset," Elena said slowly, her mind already calculating the implications. "Precisely. Your grandmother was planning to reject the offer formally this week." Margaret watched Elena carefully. "Given your personal history with Mr. Chen, we wanted to make sure you were comfortable with that decision." Elena thought about Marcus standing in the rain at her grandmother's funeral, serving her with legal papers while his mother called her a gold digger. She thought about Isabel's cruel satisfaction and the way Marcus had looked at her pregnant belly with disgust. Then she thought about her grandmother spending her last weeks documenting business decisions, protecting her granddaughter from predators, building walls around Morrison Maritime that would keep people like Marcus Chen from ever taking advantage of what the Morrison women had built. "Not only am I comfortable rejecting his offer," Elena said clearly, "I want to send a message that Morrison Maritime is under new management, and we're not interested in doing business with anyone who doesn't meet our ethical standards." Around the table, board members exchanged glances that looked almost like approval. "There's one more thing you should know," Catherine Martinez said carefully. "Mr. Chen's attorney filed paperwork yesterday requesting a restraining order against you. Claims of harassment, stalking, emotional distress. It's completely fabricated based on the investigation Mr. Callahan shared with us, but it will require a legal response." Elena felt her hands clench into fists under the table. Marcus wasn't content with humiliating her at the funeral. He was trying to legally brand her as a stalker, to create a paper trail that would make her look unstable and desperate. "What do you recommend?" Catherine's smile turned predatory. "I recommend we file a countersuit for defamation, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We have security footage from the funeral showing Mr. Chen and his party approaching you uninvited, witnesses who can testify to their aggressive behavior, and documentation that every one of their harassment claims is false. We also recommend," Robert added, "that we send a formal letter to Chen Development Group notifying them that the Charleston property is not for sale at any price, and that all future communications should go through Morrison Maritime's legal department rather than to you personally. Won't that reveal who I am? Won't Marcus figure out I own Morrison Maritime?" "Not necessarily. The letter will come from our general counsel and won't mention your name." Catherine pulled up a draft on her tablet. "It will simply state that ownership has changed hands and the new owner has different priorities than the previous administration. He'll assume we were sold to some corporate entity or investment group. Men like Marcus Chen never imagined that the woman they've dismissed might actually be the decision maker." Rebecca, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner taking notes, spoke up for the first time. How long can we keep Elena's identity secret? Margaret considered the question carefully. In the shipping industry? Indefinitely, if we're careful. Morrison Maritime is privately held, so we don't have public disclosure requirements. The board can continue running day-to-day operations while Elena learns the business. As far as anyone outside this room knows, Victoria Morrison's estate is still in probate and leadership questions haven't been resolved. Which gives me time, Elena said slowly, understanding the strategy. Time to learn the business, time to get stronger, time to prepare for the moment when Marcus and everyone else discovers who I really am. Exactly. David Harrison's expression was approving. Your grandmother always said that the best revenge is success. She'd want you to build something so extraordinary that when people finally learn the truth, they'll understand the magnitude of their mistake in underestimating you. Elena felt her daughter kick hard against her ribs, as if agreeing with the plan. She looked around the conference room at her grandmother's hand-picked team, at people who'd proven their loyalty over decades, at the empire Victoria Morrison had built, while everyone thought she was just a nice old lady who liked museums. Then let's start with the business briefing, Elena said firmly. I want to understand everything about this company. Our strengths, our vulnerabilities, our opportunities, and our threats. And I want to understand exactly how Morrison Maritime relates to every business Marcus Chen operates. Why? Margaret asked, though her smile suggested she already knew the answer. Because my grandmother taught me that you can't compete effectively with someone unless you understand them completely. And while I don't want revenge, I do want justice. Elena met each board member's eyes in turn. Marcus Chen is going to learn that the desperate, needy woman he humiliated at a funeral is actually the person who controls assets he needs for his business to grow. And when he finally understands what he threw away, I want him to know it was his own arrogance and cruelty that cost him everything. The board meeting lasted 4 hours. Elena absorbed information like someone drowning, absorbing air. Shipping routes and port capacities, regulatory frameworks and international trade agreements, profit margins and growth projections. Her head spun with terminology she'd need to learn, and relationships she'd need to build, and decisions that would affect 12,000 employees worldwide. But underneath the overwhelming flood of information, Elena felt something else growing. Not confidence exactly, but potential. The sense that her grandmother had been right. That all those years of managing museum projects and coordinating restorations and dealing with difficult donors had actually been preparing her for exactly this. When Margaret finally closed the last presentation, it was nearly 1 p.m., and Elena's stomach was growling loud enough to be audible. We should break for lunch, Patricia O'Connor said kindly. There's a private dining room on this floor, and our chef prepared something special for your first day. Chef? Elena repeated faintly. Your grandmother believed that people think more clearly on a full stomach, David Harrison said with a smile. Morrison Maritime has provided lunch for the executive team since 1985. It's a small thing, but it means we can work through midday without losing momentum. The private dining room was elegant and understated, with the same water views as the conference room. A buffet had been laid out. Grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, fresh bread, and a salad that looked far better than anything Elena had eaten in months. As the board members filled their plates and settled into comfortable conversation, Elena realized this was deliberate too. Her grandmother had built a culture where executives actually liked each other, where business discussions could happen over meals, where the team functioned as something close to family. Your grandmother used to say that logistics was about moving goods efficiently, but leadership was about moving people effectively, Margaret said, settling into the chair next to Elena. She built this company on relationships, not just contracts. Every person in this room has worked here for at least 15 years. Several of us have been here since the beginning. Why? Elena asked. You could work anywhere. Why stay with Morrison Maritime? Because Victoria Morrison treated us like partners instead of employees. David Harrison joined them with his plate. She shared profits generously, listened to our ideas, gave us autonomy to make decisions, and created an environment where excellence was expected, but mistakes were treated as learning opportunities. Also, Catherine Martinez added with a slight smile, because she paid us very, very well and structured our compensation so we'd be invested in the company's long-term success rather than quarterly results. She wanted you to have security, Elena said, understanding. So you'd make decisions based on what was right, not what was profitable in the short term. Now you're thinking like a Morrison, Margaret said approvingly. After lunch, the board walked Elena through Morrison Maritime's physical spaces, the operations center where logistics managers tracked cargo ships in real time across multiple screens, the client services floor where account managers negotiated contracts, the IT department where programmers were developing proprietary tracking software. Every employee they passed looked at Elena with curiosity, and several stopped to offer condolences about her grandmother. One elderly shipping coordinator actually cried when she saw Elena, saying that Victoria had personally helped her through a family crisis 20 years ago and changed her life. Your grandmother remembered every employee's name, Patricia O'Connor said quietly as they walked. All 12,000 of them, somehow. She'd send birthday cards and anniversary gifts and flowers when people had babies or family members died. She made everyone feel valued. How did she manage that while running a billion-dollar company? She made it a priority. She said that people were the real asset, not ships or ports or contracts. Everything else could be replaced. But a loyal team who believed in the company's mission was priceless. By 4 p.m., Elena was exhausted. Her back ached from being on her feet, her head was spinning with information, and her daughter was practicing what felt like gymnastics against her internal organs. You've had enough for today, Margaret said firmly when she saw Elena wince. Go home, rest, process everything you've learned. We'll schedule another session for next week. But there's so much more I need to understand, and you have 6 months to learn it. One day at a time, Elena. Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. Your grandmother built this empire over 40 years. You don't need to understand it all in 4 hours. Robert walked Elena and Rebecca to the parking garage, carrying a box full of documents for Elena to review. Your grandmother left one more thing for you, he said, pulling an envelope from his briefcase. Instructions for the next phase. Elena opened it in the car while Rebecca drove them back to Georgetown. Inside was another letter in her grandmother's handwriting. My darling Elena, if you're reading this, you've survived your first board meeting. Well done. I know it was overwhelming, but I also know you handled it with the grace and intelligence I raised you to have. Now comes the difficult part, not learning the business. You'll master that easily enough. The difficult part is figuring out what you want to do about Marcus Chen. I've left you enough documentation to destroy him if you choose. His business practices are questionable at best, and his mother's manipulation of his personal life borders on pathological. You could ruin them both quite easily. But I don't think that's who you are, Elena. I think you're better than that. So here's my advice. Build something beautiful. Use Morrison Maritime to make the world better, to treat your employees well, to conduct business with integrity. Show Marcus Chen through your actions, not your words, what it means to have real power coupled with actual character. And when the time comes for him to learn the truth, and it will come, make no mistake, let your success speak for itself. The best revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming so extraordinary that people realize what they missed out on and spend the rest of their lives regretting their choices. Be extraordinary, my darling girl. You already are. All my love. Grandmother Elena folded the letter carefully and looked out the window at Baltimore disappearing behind them. Somewhere in this city, Marcus Chen was probably closing deals and making plans with Isabel, never suspecting that the woman he'd humiliated yesterday was now in a position to affect every aspect of his business. "What are you thinking?" Rebecca asked. "I'm thinking that my grandmother was right. The best revenge is success." Elena touched her belly where her daughter was finally settling down. "I'm going to build something extraordinary. And when Marcus finally learns the truth, he's going to understand exactly what he threw away when he served me with those papers at her funeral." "That's my girl," Rebecca said with satisfaction. That night, Elena fell asleep in her own apartment for the first time since her grandmother died, surrounded by shipping manifests and corporate reports and her grandmother's handwritten notes. Her phone sat silent on the nightstand, Marcus's number blocked, his attorney's calls ignored. His entire existence temporarily erased from her life while she built the foundation for her future. He thought he'd won by pushing her away. He had no idea the war had just begun. And Elena Morrison, chairwoman of a $900 million shipping empire, had no intention of losing. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.